Bible is more African than you think. Far from being introduced to the continent by colonialists in the 1800s, Africa is fundamental to the whole narrative of the Bible. Africa and Africans are mentioned more than 1,400 times through Scripture. In the ancestral stories in Genesis, for example, of Abraham, Sarah, Hagar, Isaac, Rebekah, and Jacob, Africa is part of the setting where these biblical characters move in and out of Egypt and across the north of the continent. Ethiopia is also mentioned, along with modern-day Sudan, Tunisia, Niger, and Libya. The Christian communities in North Africa were among the earliest in the world, as Mark the Evangelist, the writer of the first gospel, took the good news from Jerusalem to Alexandria on the Egyptian coast around AD 50. The African early church leader called Tertullian is known as the father of Western theology. He was the first person to use the word Trinity to describe the Bible's revelation of God as one in three, and is famous for his saying, "The blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church." Perpetua and Felicity were two of the most courageous of such African martyrs in the 3rd century. A married noblewoman and a slave woman were martyred together, both under pressure from close family members and government to recant their faith. They are respected across the Catholic and Protestant churches to this day as their unwavering faith in the face of wild animals in the Colosseum and eventual death by sword led so many to Christ. Early Christian theology took flight in Africa. Clement of Alexandria directed the first theological school founded in Egypt. Another African, Origen, became the director of the school at age 18 and is widely accepted as the finest mind the church would produce in 300 years. The famous Saint Augustine was an African from Algeria, the city of Hippo, especially famous for his books Confessions, City of God, and On Christian Doctrine. He also shaped the practice of biblical exegesis and helped lay the foundation of much of Middle Age and modern Christian thought and preaching. The very canon of Scripture was finally agreed on in Africa, where the question of which books should be included and which not was finally settled in AD 397 in North Africa at what is known as the Council of Carthage. The African Athanasius was the first person to list the 27 books of the New Testament Bible, which were accepted on that day and until now. With the African and Middle Eastern setting of Scripture and the very birth, death, and resurrection of Christ in Israel, the juncture of Asia and Africa, Christianity is certainly not a white man's religion, but rather a faith shared by those of darker skin tones with those of paler hue, and indeed every shade of color to the ends of the earth.